I'm a lawyer by training. I teach the law. I teach tort law primarily, but I also love Hawaiian history. And what does Hawaiian history have to do with these 9 people? Not all of them are on the court right now, but it's this. There's this quote by this professor. The United States Supreme Court is the only institution in human experience that has the power to declare history. That is to articulate some understanding of the past and then compel the rest of society to conform its behavior to that understanding. This was a quote from decades ago. As you've seen in the last at least 2 to 3 years, the United States Supreme Court has rewritten history and has used and weaponized, I would argue, history in very interesting ways to change the law and the structures that have governed us for decades. What does this have to do with you and my presentation on Hawaii's history? Well, given the path that the U.S. Supreme Court is going on, there is a lot more interest in the ways in which state courts are dealing with legal issues. Okay, so basically my 101 on the U.S. Supreme Court is they've raised their hands and they've said it's all up to state courts now. And so it's more important for our judges, for the community to understand our own history, our own state history. And so today I want to take the time to go over larger things in Hawaii's history, particularly looking at the importance and significance of labor. As Andrea said, I teach a Hawaiian legal history class over 14 weeks, and I think we barely scratched the surface on Hawaiian history. So this is a 30-minute presentation on Hawaiian history, so please do not expect me to cover everything. But what I will cover, I think, are some of the significant aspects of our history that is important to understanding labor and where we are today. So we're going to start in the Wakahiko. We're going to go back, play your pahu drum, ipu, and we're going to go back to, this is the first map of Hawaii. Okay? At this time, Hawaii had its own governance structure. A structure that was not a capitalist structure. A structure that was very much a structure based on community support. Helping other people. Right? Ensuring what I like to say reciprocity among people. Everybody had food. Everybody had shelter. Everybody had clothing. Everybody felt safe. Sound familiar? Yeah. Things that you guys try to fight for now. That's what ancient Hawaii was like. Now, there were rules that were there that governed how you keep that balance, how you keep what we called pono. Okay? And this reciprocity was amongst people, but it also was between the people and the land and its resources. Okay, we take care of the land, we take care of the resources, the water, it'll take care of us, right? All of that stuff is coming back today. This, what was called the kapu system, gets unified amongst all the island chains by this man, Kamehameha Pae'a, with the help of Western support. He unifies the island. Kauai, I know Jody now lives on Maui, but Kauai was sort of the last holdout. They negotiated a peace treaty. And so now you have one unified government structure that was still the kapu system. His son comes in and the kapu system basically gets abolished. We call that the fall of the kapu system, the Aikapu. And so there is a state of kind of chaos in Hawaii, religious chaos. People are trying to figure out how they're going to govern themselves if the king has sort of abolished this system. Enter New England missionaries. Okay, so at the time that the missionaries come in with their ideals of government, right? So this is the early 1820s. Okay, what's happening in 1820s in the United States? Where's our U.S. history teachers? Right, build up to the Civil War, right? But you have all of this intellectual discussion about democracy, right? You just come off of the Declaration, creating this Constitution. People are fighting about people power. Okay, so these missionaries come in and they have their ideals about Western democracy. You also have folks from other countries coming in. And so eventually that leads to Kamehameha III coming in and taking advice from someone from England, basically. Okay? And so he creates a constitutional monarchy, not a republic like we have in the United States, but a constitutional monarchy. You know that New Englanders hated constitutional monarchies, right? It didn't work out too well. So they're coming in with this antagonism already towards a sovereign, towards a king, okay? Towards a monarchical system. Kauikeauli, King Kamehameha III, decides that he's going to create this new government, and he says, when he creates the first constitution of the kingdom, I'm going to give some of my power. I'm the king. My dad was the king. And by king, I mean he was all-time supreme. Like he was the re-embodiment of all of the gods in him. And with that mana, that power, I'm going to give some of my governmental power to the people. And so he creates this constitutional monarchy where you have different branches of government and people can get involved. The king sits at the head of each of those branches of government. Okay? Very quickly, you start to see this influx of other countries coming in, trying to take over. There was a kind of a successful seizure of the lands by the British that came in. They sent out emissaries. It all got squashed. You got Thomas Square now. You can talk to me about the story of that place later. Kamehameha III sends out people to try to get ratifications of treaties to recognize the Kingdom of Hawaii as a sovereign nation. Okay, and he's very successful in doing that. He starts in America. America's like, we're not ready for that yet. Goes across the Atlantic, goes to France and England. They sign the treaty. On the way back, America's like, okay, now we're ready. You got our friends to sign it, we'll sign it. So now you have the independent Kingdom of Hawaii, okay, recognized as a sovereign nation. What is running and fueling that economy? Anybody know? Whaling, and then sandalwood, and ultimately it's sugar. Okay? So we have a lot of, well, we have land and we have water, right? That's what you need for sugar. And we have nice climate too. That's what you need for sugar. Very productive place. Kamehameha V comes into power, and over his uncle's, Kamehameha III's time, some of that power has gotten stripped away because of some of the economic pressures that are happening in the islands. Kamehameha V comes to the throne and he says, I'm just like my grandfather, Kamehameha I, and I'm going to take power back to the monarchy. Okay, so now again, you have this tension between a sovereign, monarchy, and the people. Okay, so there's growing tensions, particularly within the immigrant community here. And immigrants, I mean people from America and Europe, right, at this time. Those immigrants coming in and having their ideas about what government should look like. But because of the influx of sugar, we need laborers to come in, right? And so there are efforts across the world to get people to come in and woo them into the Kingdom of Hawaii. King Kalakaua, notice I skipped like monarchs. King Kalakaua comes to the throne and he negotiates what's called the Reciprocity Treaty. Okay, and this is a treaty between the United States, exclusive treaty between the United States and the Kingdom of Hawaii, where all goods from Hawaii, from the United States would come in tax-free to the kingdom, and sugar would go in tax-free to the United States. Okay, this is like build up to the Civil War, the South, you know, they're doing their thing, and sugar is expensive from the South, so Hawaii is a nice way to supplement the needs of the North for sugar, right? But to fuel that, you need workers, and there were not enough workers. So they started to bring in folks from all over the world. So you'll see this quote. Between 1837 and 1868, sugar production went from about 4,000 pounds to 17 million pounds. And so there's an obvious need for workers to come in to keep that engine running, to keep the economy going. So you started with getting folks from China, you started getting folks from Japan, and then eventually all kinds of other people. But the system that they create here was one that I think people kind of fondly look upon as like the plantation system now, kind of look upon it like that. But it was a very racially divisive and hurtful system that was created. It was a system that divided people by races and systematically ensured separation and division to keep the economic engine running. So everyone came in with big promises. You would get education, you would get housing, which they did. It wasn't, all the time, it wasn't the best, but they did get that small pay. But because of the system that they set up, you were forced to stay where you were, and you couldn't kind of get out of that system. By far, the plantation laborers outnumbered everybody else, by far, in the Kingdom of Hawaii. Okay? So they had the numbers of people to really make change, but we're still a monarchical system, right? We still have a sovereign. In the late 1880s, there was an individual named Katsugoto, who was a Japanese immigrant, who could speak both English and Japanese. And he was a store owner in Honoka'a. And what he did was, because he could speak both languages, he became the interpreter for a lot of Japanese immigrants who were complaining, right? They were made promises when they came about the conditions and about the things that they would have, and those promises were not being met by the lunas, right? By the people who were in charge of the plantations. Katsugoto gets lynched by plantation owners and their minions. This is still the Kingdom of Hawaii. They get prosecuted, they get charged, they get found guilty of his murder. Okay, so they piece together evidence, and some of them are locked up. A couple of them escape prison, and they end up in Australia somehow. But some of them, they get pardoned when the new government comes in. Okay, so I'll just kind of leave that there as you think about the tensions that are happening in the islands. While this is going on in the continent, you have anti-Chinese legislation, anti-Japanese legislation that is happening on the federal side. Okay, so you see this growing tension that is coming around both across the United States and here in the Kingdom of Hawaii. This is Ali'iolani Hale. Behind Ali'iolani Hale is Kaka'ako. I love this picture, and I love to show it at like every presentation I give, because look at what Kaka'ako looks like, and this is what it used to look like. But I share this because in 1887, a group of the plantation owners and their connecting businesses, so plantations, banking, sugar, docks, all of that were kind of controlled by the same individuals. They hui together, and they forced Kalakaua to sign a new constitution. So this is 1887. 1887 Constitution, sometimes called the Bayonet Constitution, because it was forced at basically gunpoint for Kalakaua to sign. Not by any, usually when you amend the Constitution, you got to go through a process. That was their process. You put a gun to his head and say we're going to kill people and sign it. That is the Constitution that now becomes force. Okay, so you have these changing constitutional systems and structures that are coming about solely by the power of the sovereign, right, to create this new governing document. In January 1893, Kalakaua's sister, Lili'uokalani, comes to the throne. And Lili'uokalani, who you can see here, hopefully in this picture, she has an idea. Her idea is she's going to, like the rest of her predecessors, create a new constitution. She had gone around after she had become queen to hear from the people, and the people said, we want you to get power back from these business owners, back into your hands so that you can do things positively for the community and the people. And the people meaning all of the citizens, which again were majority immigrant communities, right, who were still citizens of the kingdom. All of whom wanted Lili'u to get back power from the plantations to help them. So she, in January 1893, is about to propose a new constitution, and word gets around really quickly that she's going to do this. She makes her way to Ali'iolani Hale, where she prorogues, so this is like sine die for the legislature, party, thank you, you're done. And then she goes back to Iolani Palace to propose that constitution. While she's there, her cabinet says, we're not supporting you. We're hearing rumblings that the American group here in the islands. They're not happy with this. Behind the scenes, there is an effort to overthrow her. Part of this effort is this group of individuals. In the middle is a man named Sanford B. Dole, who was a justice of the Supreme Court of the Kingdom of Hawaii in the morning. In the afternoon, he became the head of the provisional government. And this committee of safety that they create align themselves with America and this individual named John L. Stevens. John L. Stevens is, for lack of a better word, the ambassador to the kingdom from the United States. John L. Stevens has at his disposal the USS Boston and the United States Marines, and he has the authority, if there's any life or property at stake, American life or property at stake, he has the authority to call up the Marines and call up the USS Boston to protect the lives and property of Americans. So that is the impetus for what we now know as the overthrow. Okay, so John L. Stevens orders the American Marines to land on the kingdom's soil. Honolulu Harbor has the USS Boston out there. For decades, even when I was growing up and learning about Hawaiian history, there still wasn't like evidence, right? There was testimony that was created, but people sort of said, that's just, people said that, it doesn't really mean anything. This was discovered in 2017. This is a letter from John L. Stevens to Sanford Dole, Judge Dole, who was Supreme Court judge, Kingdom Supreme Court judge, basically saying that, I don't want you to say anything that we're supporting you until you take over a certain building. You take over the police station. Once you do that, then you can tell everybody we support your overthrow. All of that was sort of hearsay up until this point. This was less than a decade ago that this document was kind of uncovered. And so Liliuokalani's in this interesting position, right? What does she do? If she decides that she's going to fight, which all evidence suggests that had she raised arms, she could have taken out the USS Boston and the Marines, right? What would have happened? War would have happened, right? America for sure would have had now an impetus to come in and take the kingdom. So if she did that, that wasn't a good option. The other option was to kind of surrender, which she wasn't going to do. What she did do was she wrote a letter and said, you know what, I will turn my power over to America. They will do the right thing. America's built on justice, equality, fairness. They will have their investigations, and they will find and conclude that what was done was illegal, okay? And they'll restore my kingdom. So, the president at the time sends out his emissary, James Blunt. He does a report, gets all this information, concludes this was an act of war by the United States, in essence, okay? And America needs to restore Liliuokalani to the throne. Congress decides, well, we don't trust the president's report, so we're going to do our own report. Sound familiar? And so the Senate, the United States Senate, decides to do its own investigation into it. They come up with conclusions, and their conclusions is, I actually don't know. We're not going to take sides. That seemed like a little internal thing that happened. You guys figure it out yourselves. Okay, so America basically raises their hands. That is now an opportunity for the provisional government to declare themselves the Republic of Hawaii. Okay, so they literally, the constitution that they create is them coming together, creating a constitution that creates the Republic of Hawaii. There are attempts at annexing Hawaii to the United States. Native Hawaiians and non-Native Hawaiians do not want to be annexed to the United States, so they sign petitions, and they convince the Senate not to ratify these treaties. Okay? Hawaii becomes a territory in 1900. How did that happen? Take my class. We'll figure that one out together. I'm going to move now into territorial Hawaii. Hawaii becomes a territory. Okay? Capital punishment statistics. Okay? You can look at the ethnicity of some of these individuals that are being put to the death penalty. And you can see that the death penalty is being used as a weapon to subdue and send messages to certain types of individuals. Right? So you can see the messages that are being sent. You can see the waves of people that are coming in, right, into Hawaii, into the workforce. Okay, again, this is all part of a system to control labor in Hawaii so people don't get out of line. Okay? And it's actually a pretty successful way to control people, unfortunately. Okay? People are scared of the Lunas, and they are afraid of each other. Okay? But you start to see little enclaves of people starting to intermarry, people starting to find connections in other ways. And that's all through having that common bond of working in these really horrible conditions, getting paid really low wages for somebody else that's making a whole bunch of money and using you. More statistics and stories about the criminal justice system in the territory. Okay, so you have an individual who robbed and murdered a Japanese taxi driver, sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, leaves Hawaii, never comes back. 10 years later, you have a Japanese man who kidnaps and murders a child in revenge. He's sentenced and put to death within 2 weeks after his arrest. This leads to the Massey case. I'm sure you've all heard of the Massey case, right? So the tensions in Hawaii are palpable. The racial tensions are palpable. The Massey incident gets media attention across the United States. And it's one of those things that, to me sometimes is really hard to teach, to think about the ways in which this was actually happening basically in my grandparents' generation, right? This is the world that they grew up in, which is, thankfully very different than the world we live in now. In the 1930s, you have the federal government passing collective bargaining, allowing collective bargaining to happen. World War II just changes everything here in Hawaii. And so while you started to see protests in Hawaii, particularly in the labor, on the docks particularly, there's a famous Hilo massacre that occurred in 1938 before World War II. People are not yet, they don't have the mobilization and the community organizing to really rally together. World War II changes that. Okay, there are folks who come back from the war, who have served the country, who have seen people die alongside them, who are saying, why are we fighting for all of these, the freedoms of all of these other people across the world when we don't have those freedoms and security ourselves? Okay, so these are like the 442 guys coming back who are now educated, thank you teachers, who come back and they get their education, right? People like Danny Noyce, Spark Matsunaga, Dan Akaka. I'm going to throw Patsy Mink. She didn't serve there, but Patsy Mink is somebody that we need to remember who comes and gets educated and decides that they need to make a change, right, in our system. But what happened in World War II, aside from those folks that came back, is that, America kind of imprisoned a whole bunch of Japanese Americans on the continent. Half of the population in Hawaii at the time were Japanese Americans. There was no way that the plantation Lunas were going to allow half of their workers to be incarcerated. And so there was a special effort and an exception made for Hawaii to exclude Japanese Americans in Hawaii from the internment, unless you met really, really specific categories. And so here's an individual who was locked up and detained in Honouliuli. Okay, but the power that the business interests had in Hawaii was pretty extraordinary. They could go to the President of the United States and say, you're talking about these threats from Japanese Americans. You're shutting down all of the west coast of the United States. Exclude Hawaii from that, please. Sure, we'll exclude Hawaii from that law. Okay? And so you can see the strength of the business interests. people come back and they're fed up with this, right? You start to see people organizing, community organizers coming out. ILWU is a huge player in the story of organizing the plantation workers. You have big strikes that occur in the 1940s. Leading up to this are efforts that are being done not only in the community organizing space, but also in the legal space. Okay, so there are people like Harriet Boslog, who I hope you know who she was, a very prominent labor lawyer in Hawaii, one of the only female lawyers at the time in Hawaii. But she was one of the ILWU's lawyers, and she would fight against the practices of the businesses. But she also represented union members in like their divorce matters or their DUIs or all of those things. She was like a people's person lawyer. Okay, so she did the high level stuff, but also like the day-to-day lawyering that is super important for people to feel, to breathe in their lives, right? So Harriet Boslog was one of those people. You had at this time, communism was a thing and unions are commies and all of this stuff. Harriet Boslog got dragged into that. And there was a case that went all the way up to the US Supreme Court where she lost her law license in the territory of Hawaii because they alleged that she was a communist, right? So the McCarthy thing that was happening on the continent was happening here in Hawaii against unions. So there was suits filed against Jack Hall and all of these other folks. Okay, so the Red Scare was very much present here in Hawaii. That makes people more energized, right? That gets people, we gotta unify and rally. And in 1954, the Democratic Party successfully takes the territorial legislature. Okay, and this is the same Democratic Party we have today that kind of runs everything, right? They come in and they call it the Blue Wave back then in 54. So they take the legislature and they start to make their changes. First thing on the agenda, get rid of capital punishment. And they do in the territorial legislature. Fast forward a few more years, John Burns wins the governorship, picks the namesake of our law school, C.J. Richardson, William Richardson, as his lieutenant governor. And now the Democrats control state government. Okay, so this was in 64. In 1968, there is a constitutional convention. At this convention, we enshrine in our highest law in our state. So to give you, how much we prioritize and value unionization and collective bargaining of public sector employees. This was put into our Constitution, right? This is the highest form of law. And they did that in 1968, before many other states were even thinking about it. And in fact, there are states now getting rid of their provisions like that. Not gonna happen in Hawaii, but after that was put into the Constitution, not an easy thing to change the Constitution, by the way, but you got that in the Constitution. For the years after that, they create Chapter 89. Okay, we're familiar with Chapter 89, okay, which governs collective bargaining. Another key person that I think is, you all should know is Ed Nakamura. He was also a lawyer, became a judge. But what he did as a lawyer was primarily political lawyering. So while Harriet Boslog was doing the in-court, representing people day to day, Ed Nakamura was at the legislature fighting for the rights of everybody that their union members were able to get. Okay, so some people have criticized him for saying, it's like the downfall of the unions if you're now giving everybody these rights, right? And his position was, no, that's the job of our union, right? That's the job of our work environment, right, is to ensure that we are protecting all of the workers out there. And so they were successful in doing things like, in 1969, TDI, mandatory health insurance, before this was on the minds of everybody else in the whole world, right? In Hawaii, we were doing these things, all because of the labor movement that was happening in our islands, right? All because of the solidarity that came about because of this really unfortunate plantation system that we did have. I could go on and on for hours about water, right, and law, and the impact that that has on everything that we do. But I don't have an hour. I will leave you with these pictures with Yergo, the ILWU Hall. We have a nice staircase that has this mural, beautiful mural. And then I'll leave you with like a thanks, because you folks are the ones fighting, right, every day for my kids, you know, for our kids. I did go to Kamehameha, I graduated from Kamehameha, but I went to Kapunahala Elementary, and I wouldn't be here standing in front of you as a law professor, as a lawyer, had it not been for teachers along my journey, even from kindergarten, who I still remember, who I still reach out to, who sort of tapped me on the shoulder and was like, keep going, little boy from public housing in Kaneohe, keep going, right? You have that impact. Andrea asked me if I would speak to you folks, and I was like, I got keiki hula that weekend. I'm probably gonna be either hungover or I don't know. But like in that conversation, I was like, no, I absolutely want to talk to you folks. I want to share this with you because you are the ones that get to touch the lives of way more kids than I get to touch the lives of, right? You are the ones who get to have immediate impact on the lives of people. And you don't just say these things, but you actually are out there, not only fighting for yourselves and for kids, but you're also fighting for other people, right? Other people that need all of our solidarity and support. And so thank you for giving me this opportunity. This was my quick breeze through Hawaiian history and labor law and labor issues. But Andrea has my contact. Contact her after the bar exam if you want to reach out to me. But thank you so much for having me, and I hope you guys have a nice rest of your conference.